Hello and welcome back. In this video we are going to see on how to handle this kind of exception, and we will extract the useful information from this and we will present them in the most readable way, and we will see the stack trace that will contain exactly what is happening into our exception. And to do this we need to set a couple of things, and I want you to follow me on how we are going to do this. I'm going to minimize my postman and I'm going to go back into my code. And inside the errors where we have this API response, we're going to create another class that will help us with the exception, and we will have to derive from the API response. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new C# class, and I'm going to call this as API exception and press enter. And after creating this API exception, first of all, we need to remove the unnecessary usings because we don't need all of these usings at the top. And again, we need to derive from the API response. And as you are seeing here, you can see that now this is now underlined. And the reason for this is because inside the API response, we don't have an empty constructor. And in order to fix this, we need to generate the constructor with the parameters. So I'm going to use the quick fix, and I'm going to generate the constructor with all of these parameters. And in this case, you can see that the error is now gone. And in here we have this for the status code, we have this for the message, and you can see that we tried to construct all of this. And again, we need to add another property for the details, because we would need to see the details about the exception that we are getting. So I'm going to say plop, and I'm going to make this as a string, and I'm going to call this as details. And as we having all of these parameters, we need to add also the parameter for the details. So I'm going to say string details, and this will be equal to null. And inside here we need to say that these details will be equal to this details. So I'm going to say here it is details, the typo here, and I'm going to say that the details will be equal to the details from the parameters. All right, and after setting all of this, we need also to add the middleware. And the middleware will be the one that will help us to catch the exception, and we have to never crash our whole server because of that exception. And after setting up the middleware, we'll see on how to use it into the program.cs so as to be able to avoid any crash on our server. In order to do that, we need to first, let me minimize this. I'm going to go to the API project. I'm going to create a new folder, and as we can be having multiple middleware, I need to make the folder for the middleware. So I'm going to say middleware, and I'm going to go ahead and press enter. Inside here we need to add now the middleware for the exception. I'm going to create a new C# class, and I'm going to call this as exception middleware. After creating this exception middleware, we need now to add the constructor so as to be able to bring something in here that we will be using. I'm going to create this constructor, and inside the constructor we need to use the request delegate from HTTP. So I'm going to say request delegate, and I'm going to call this as next, because we need to execute the next bunch of code whenever we don't have any exception. And again, we need to bring now the iLogger in here so as to be able to log the errors. So I'm going to say iLogger, and we need to specify that it will be logging all for this exception middleware, and I'm going to call this as logger. And lastly, we need also to check if we are in the development environment or we are on the production. So, and here maybe I made a typo. Let me try to correct this real quick. Exception, and I'm going to be calling this logger. And again, we need to check if we are running in development mode, and we will be showing more about the specific error that we got. And when we will be in production, we will have to show only the error code without providing much of the information as we will be on the production. And I'm going to use the iHost environment, and in this case I'm going to call this as env or m. And we need also to initialize the field from these, and you have to do this for the logger tool and as well as the inf. So I'm going to go ahead and generate these two and kind of bring something. And as always, you need to remove all of these because we need to use this kind of syntax. After setting up all of these, we need to add other methods that will help us with all of these. And before we continue, I'm going to remove these unnecessary usings on the top. Before I forgot, I need to make my code clean. And after that, I'm going to be adding now this public async task. And I'm going to call this as invoke async. And inside here, I'm going to be passing the HTTP context, and I'm going to be calling this as context. All right, and inside here, as we are going to be dealing with this kind of exceptions, we need to use the try and catch so as to be able to avoid now the crash on our server. And the way we do that, I'm going to use the snippet for the try and catch. I'm going to say try. I'm going to use this try and catch. And in here, we need to try something, and whenever we get the exception, we need to catch it here. So I'm going to call this as EX, like this one. And in the try section, you're going to say await. And here now we are considering that we don't have any mistake or any exception. We are going to say next. Here it is. And you're going to say that it's going to use the context from the HTTP context and then end these. Whenever we have now this exception, we need to consider a bunch of things inside here. And in this case, I'm going to remove this throw, and you're going to be seeing on how we're going to handle this kind of things. First of all, we have to say that we have to log this error. So I'm going to say that logger, we log the error by using the logger, and I'm going to say logger.log error. And the error that we're going to be logging will be logging the error itself and also the message that is inside here. I'm going to say ex.message. And again, you're going to say that we are going to receive the response as the JSON, and we have also to provide some of the options so as to be able to return the specified JSON. I'm going to say that context.response.content type, and as we're going to be getting the JSON, and I'm going to say that this will be equal to application JSON, like this one. And after setting this, we need also to identify or to specify the kind of the error that we will be logging. And I'm going to say context.response, and I'm going to be saying that status code will be equal to, we need to cast this into the integer, and it will be the integer of HTTP status code. And the status code that we need is now the internal server error. All right. And after this, as we're going to be getting the errors in two types of environment, there will be the generation of error inside the production and also in the development. In order to handle this, I'm going to create now the response that we will have to check before writing anything. So I'm going to say var response, and this response will be equal to I'm going to use the ternary operator in here. I'm going to say that env dot is development, and after doing this, I'm going to use this ternary operator, and I'm going to say if now we are in development, I'm going to say new, and we're going to create now the instance of API exception, and I'm going to say API exception, and it will be imported from the errors. And in here we need to pass in the int, and you need to add now the HTTP status code. And in here we need also to add this as internal server error. And after doing this, we need to add more arguments. You can see that now it is asking us for the message, and it is also asking us for the details. And in order to do that, I'm going to add the comma. I'm going to say ex.message as the message, and again the details will be the stack trace that we'll be getting, and I'm going to say that ex dot stack trace. And as we're having the details as a string, we need to cast these two strings so as to be able to match the type. And here we go. After handling this one condition, we need also to add the second condition when the first one is not met. And whenever we are not in the development, we need also to create the instance of this API exception, but the error message that we'll be getting will be totally different from the one with a lot of details. In this case, we are going to be getting HTTP status code, and we're going to get the internal server error. And that will be all. There's nothing else as will be in the production. And as we're going to be returning now the JSON, we need to set the naming policy for the JSON, because when we don't set anything to return this as a plain text instead of returning this into the camel case. And as we're going to be using the JSON serializer, we need to provide some options, and I'm going to say var options, and this will be equal to a new JSON serializer option. And after doing this, I'm going to go inside and say property naming policy, and I'm going to be choosing the JSON policy camel case. Here it is. All right. And then you can go ahead and end this. And after setting these options, we need also to create the JSON that will contain our response. I'm going to say var JSON, and this JSON will be created using the JSON serializer. I'm going to say JSON serializer. I'm going to say .serialize, and I'm going to pass in the response first, and I'm going to pass in the options, and then we are done. And after creating this and making sure that we're getting all we need, you can go ahead and say await, and I'm going to say context.response, and I'm going to say write async, and I'm going to pass in the JSON in here and close the statement, and then we are done. And after creating this middleware, we need to register it into the program.cs, and the way we do that, I'm going to open this program.cs, and below this line of code for the build, I will need to add the middleware in here. So the way we use the middleware, we are going to say app.use middleware, and I'm going to choose these. Then the middleware that we are going to be using is going to be the exception middleware, as it is now the custom middleware that we created. So I'm going to say exception middleware, and it will have to be imported, and again put in the bracket like this one, and then we are done. And after creating all of this, it's now time to test and see if now this is working as expected. And as we made a lot of modifications, I can recommend you to restart the server before testing so as to be able to populate all the changes. I'm going to stop my server, and I'm going to restart it again to see if now the changes were populated successfully, and we'll have to test if now it is working as expected. Alrighty, so I'm going to go inside my postman in here, and I'm going to try to send the same request to see if now we're going to get the formatted data. So I'm going to go ahead and click on send, and you can see that in this case we are getting this error as formatted, and you can see that we're getting a lot of from this, and you can see that it is now even highlighted as a JSON, and you can see that the first lines is going to be giving you information about where the error is. You can see that it is, the testing controller on line 29, and again the stack trace will be that the object reference not set to an instance of an object. You can see that we're getting the message, we're getting the status code, and we are getting now these as the details. And again, I have to emphasize that this will be shown in the development only. Whenever we are on production, it will be showing only this internal server error. And this is pretty much of it on how to handle these kind of things. We continue and see on how to improve the model state validation for our entities before getting the data from the client. And I will see you guys in the next video. Hope you liked this one. If you did, make sure to show it by pressing the like button, and let me know if you met with any problem. So from now till next time, stay cool and be productive.